Buenos días a nuestra audiencia de América Latina y buenas tardes a nuestra audiencia de España. Mi nombre es Alexis Camarillo de Mega International y es un gusto poderles dar la bienvenida al evento del día de hoy, Gestión, Riesgo y Cumplimiento en Latinoamérica con el padre del GRC, Michael Rasmussen. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos el día de hoy. Antes de que inicie la sesión, me gustaría pedirles que puedan contestar una pregunta que vamos a poner en una encuesta en sus pantallas. Denme un segundo, por favor. Listo, ya deberían de poderla ver en sus pantallas. Por favor, ¿me podrían ayudar contestando esta encuesta? Vamos a dar un par de minutos para que todo el mundo la conteste y que todos se terminen de conectar también. Posterior a esta encuesta, daremos inicio a la sesión. Para los que se acaban de unir, por favor, me podrán ayudar contestando la encuesta que tenemos en pantalla, por favor, antes de que iniciemos la sesión. Listo, muchas gracias. Ahora daremos inicio a la sesión. Por favor, si tienen alguna pregunta a lo largo de la presentación, la pueden enviar a través de la caja de preguntas o questions, la pueden ver en su barra de herramientas en la aplicación de GoToWebinar. Al final de la sesión tendremos una sesión de Q&A, de preguntas y respuestas con Michael Rasmussen. Este webinar está siendo grabado y será compartido con todas las personas que se hayan registrado. Y nos vemos al final de la sesión para las preguntas que tengan.
Hola a todos, muchas gracias por acompañarnos. Mi nombre es Nelly García, soy directora de servicios de Mega International en Latinoamérica y es un gusto poder darles la bienvenida a esta sesión sobre GRC, Gobierno, Riesgo y Cumplimiento, en donde podremos platicar con nuestro invitado sobre el panorama de GRC a nivel global y cómo esta práctica ha evolucionado en la región de Latinoamérica. Y ahora me gustaría presentar a nuestro invitado, Michael Rasmussen, the GRC Pundit, quien es un experto reconocido internacionalmente en gobierno, gestión de riesgos y cumplimiento. Tiene más de 27 años de experiencia. Michael ayuda a las organizaciones a implementar y mejorar los procesos de GRC. Es orador, autor y asesor de GRC y además es conocido como el padre del GRC. También es el fundador de la empresa GRC 2020 Research. Hi, Michael. Thank you for joining us. It is great to have you here to talk to us about GRC, how this practice has evolved lately, and how our audience can benefit from this practice. How are you today?
I'm very good. It is a pleasure to be here with Mega and our audience today in Latin America.
I'm glad to hear that, Michael. We have noticed that in Latin America, GRC is becoming a real hot topic, especially since companies realize that implementing a good GRC practice can help them in their digital transformation. With that being said, it will be interesting to note first, what is your definition of GRC, what it is used for, and most importantly, why organizations should implement GRC?
Excellent question. From my perspective, every organization is already doing GRC, governance, risk management, and compliance. I don't think we'd find an organization that says we do not manage, risk, we can care less about compliance, and we don't govern the organization. Every organization has some approach and strategy to GRC within their environment and their organization. The question is much more, how can we make it more efficient, effective, and agile? How mature is it? Because your approach to GRC, whether you call it GRC, ERM, ORM, IRM, maybe you don't even have an acronym for it, you may not even have a name for it, but you're doing GRC in some form. But maybe it's that ad hoc firefighting where you're only really addressing risks and compliance and things when somebody's screaming at you, the auditor or the regulator or some other stakeholder. You might have a more mature and agile approach where it's all integrated, like with a system like Mega. So from my perspective, everybody's doing GRC, whether they use that acronym or not. It's much more a question of where they at in the maturity curve and how can they make it more efficient, effective, and agile. So that's one perspective. Now, you also asked me about definition. I like to use the OSEG definition for GRC found in the GRC capability model. That's very popular in Latin America. We do have a Spanish version of the GRC capability model at OSEG, www.oseg.org. Now, we define GRC in the GRC capability model as a capability to reliably achieve objectives. That's the governance function. We're achieving those objectives, whether they're entity level objectives, division, department, process, project, or even asset level objectives. Address uncertainty, that's risk management, and act with integrity, that's compliance. So to go through that definition again, GRC is a capability to reliably achieve objectives, address uncertainty, and act with integrity. So that's my definition. Now, at the end of the day, organizations do GRC, they don't buy GRC. Governance, risk management, compliance, these are actions and activities and behavior of the organization. Now, technology for GRC, like GRC platforms like Mega, enable GRC, makes it more efficient, effective, and agile. But what I often get frustrated with is when organizations contact me and state, we just bought GRC, now come in and tell us how to do GRC. Well, that's sort of putting the cart before the horse. What are you doing already? What's working, what's not working, and what are you trying to improve with the technology you've selected? And technology, like Mega, has got a great value proposition to make organizations better governed and to achieve its objectives, manage uncertainty and risk in those objectives within systems and processes, and act with integrity in that context. So that's over my perspective to that very first question.
Michael, some organizations mainly see risk management as a regulatory exercise and miss the point that, in fact, supports the organization's strategy. Could you please explain us why?
I completely agree with what you're saying here, that too often, and I see this all the time in North America, less in Europe. Europe tends to have more of a business perspective of risk. But there's so often, throughout Latin America as well, I get a mixture of a regulatory view of risk to a business perspective of risk. But too often, that's the pitfall, the hole that people fall into. And that they see risk management as a regulatory exercise. I cross some, my T's, dot my I's, check my check boxes. I want my get out of jail free card. And so they see it as a compliance and regulatory exercise, and that's really unfortunate. In some areas, that's because the different countries might have a prescriptive approach to regulations. They tell you exactly what you have to do, and as opposed to other countries might have a principles or outcome-based approach to regulation, where they're saying this is what you have to achieve. We're not going to tell you exactly how to achieve, which requires much more of a risk-based approach to compliance. But risk should have a business perspective. And we need to be able to focus on that and understand that risk, what is risk? Well, if we unpack that and look at the ISO 31000 definition of risk, it states that risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. And so risk is really managing the uncertainty to the organization achieving its objectives. Those objectives might be entity level objectives for the entire organization. They might be division or department level objectives. They might be process or project or asset level objectives, like personal information is an asset. What's the objectives of the collection and use of that information? Risk is the effect of uncertainty on achieving those objectives. And we need to understand that because, risk isn't just about hazard and harm. Organizations take risk all the time. Judge Mervyn Keane from South Africa, for example, he's the impetus for the 1, 2, 3, and now Keane 4 reports on corporate governance. He said that enterprise is the undertaking of risk for reward. Basically, businesses take risks to make money. Risk is a tool to the organization if used properly. We take risks all the time. The bank in Latin America builds a digital and online presence because it expands operation and helps services clients better for digital banking and things like that. But there's risks to digital banking. That's just like one example. But it's necessary to be competitive in the environment. We take risks for greater gain and benefit to the organization. Risk should never just be a regulatory exercise like crossing a T, dotting our I, checking a checkbox. It should be really embraced by the organization as a way to achieve business objectives.
Michael, could you please tell us more about the 3 lines model, what it is and how it aligns with an organization? And what does the Institute of Internal Auditors dictate related to this topic?
Well, the 3-line model I find very useful in practically understanding GRC and applying it to the organization. The 3 lines model used to be called the 3 lines of defense, but a few years back, the Institute of Internal Auditors dropped the of defense and just called it the 3 lines model. And personally, I like to work backwards. The 3rd line is the role of audit and assurance, that internal audit department. The 3rd line is there to provide assurance that the organization is, that the controls in the organizations are effective and operational, and that the organization is effectively managing the risk and meeting compliance obligations. The 3rd line is the audit and assurance function. The 2nd line is probably what a lot of us on the phone or on the web here are part of, and that's the back office risk and compliance operations, IT security, enterprise and operational risk, corporate compliance, internal controls. The 2nd line are the functions that are responsible for managing governance, risk, and compliance, GRC, day in and day out. Now, the 1st line is what I find most interesting. Because that by the Institute of Internal Auditors includes, the executive management all the way down to middle management, operational management. But I argue it extends all the way to the frontline employee. The teller at the bank is making risk and compliance decisions on cash handling, money laundering, privacy, and more every day. The doctor and nurse at a hospital are making patient safety and patient privacy decisions every hour of the day, every minute of the day. It's the frontline employees that are a concern too, because they're taking and managing risk, as well as middle management and executive management. It's the 1st line that owns risk. And so I'm seeing more and more that organizations are looking for strategy, processes, and solutions that put more and more emphasis on the front line that's taking and managing risk and owning it risk every day than those back office functions. And that's really where we're starting to see the Institute of Internal Auditors focus is more and more on the front lines of the organization, the 1st line, that the second line gets trimmed down a little bit. We still need those back office functions of risk and compliance to facilitate these discussions and to measure and analyze risk. But more and more, what we're seeing is a focus on engaging the first line on risk ownership, risk accountability, and proper guidance of risk culture and taking the right risks.
Thank you. My next question. I have read before that you mentioned that GRC enables enterprise agility. Could you elaborate on this topic and how is this accomplished, why it is important, and how can we better identify risks with an agile methodology?
That's an excellent question. And in today's context, particularly with the geopolitical, economic, and inflation, and so many other risks that we're seeing in the world in 2022 and moving into 2023, there's so much of a focus on resiliency. And resiliency is important. But my argument, which leads to your question here, is that it's better to be agile than resilient. We need both. I'm not saying we replace resilience with agility, because we absolutely need both. But to use an analogy, if I'm running down the street and I trip over an obstacle, like a log that's in my path or a hole, if I trip, resilience is the concept, how quickly can I get back up and start running again? Resilience is the ability to recover from a risk event. And risk events do happen, and organizations need to be resilient so that when there are disasters like hurricanes and earthquakes or economic and geopolitical risks and so much more, that we can recover from those. We need to be resilient to quickly recover and get systems and processes and operations back in place. But how much more a benefit is it to also be agile? To be able to see, again, using that analogy of running. If I'm running down the path and there's a log or some type of hole, if I can see that and I can leap over it or go around it where it doesn't impact me, that's agility. Agility is the ability to see what's coming at us in the organization and be able to prepare the organization for that potential risk event to either avoid it or mitigate it in its impact on the on us. And so organizations need to be resilient, but I'd also argue that they should also be investing in agility. And that agility is going to require a good understanding of our operations, our objectives, our processes, our systems, how things work and flow in the organization, which requires a strong enterprise architecture and business process modeling approach to GRC, and to be able to see what's coming at the organization and go through those scenarios to prepare the organization so it can be agile. Agility is absolutely important. We need resilience, but we also need to start thinking about enterprise risk agility in a GRC context.
Thank you. Your answer is very, very clear. Michael, moving on to the bigger picture, we can see in today's organization that there are many risk areas such as operational, cybersecurity, financial risk, health and safety, and others. Some are already covered by a framework such as COVID, COSO, and SOX, but how would you foster a more integrated approach to manage all those risks?
You need a good strategy, process, and technology that can help us view a full perspective of risk. We need full situational awareness to be able to see everything that's coming at us and how they interrelate. The physicist Fritjof Capra from over in Europe, he stated, if you study the major problems of our time, that they are interconnected and interdependent, that they cannot be understood in isolation. At the time, he's talking about biological ecosystems, but he might as well have been talking about risk management in the modern organization today, that our risks are interconnected and interdependent. COVID-19 is one example. What starts off with the health and safety risks impacts IT security risks in the work from home environment, privacy risks in the work from home environment, cultural risks in the organization with the uncertainty. There's greater risk of bribery and corruption because import and export has been shut down and limited goods are getting through, and there's been backups and limits in government contracts and permits, and there's so many risks. It's an interconnected risk environment. And no, we cannot, well, organizations fail when they manage risk in silos that don't talk to each other. IT security, for example, supports business operations, processes, services, and that IT security risk can significantly impact the risk to particular business objectives and the impact on processes, and therefore impacts financial risks. We need to show risk relationships and this interconnectivity of risk, and we need to do it from a business context and understand how the variety of risks intersect and cascade upon each other. You often have what we call chaos theory, which it's the theory where the flutter of the butterfly's wings in the Netherlands over in Europe makes tiny atmospheric changes that can influence the development and path of a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. Who knows? Hurricane Ian that just came through a few weeks back might have started with the flutter of a butterfly wing in the Netherlands in Europe. It's those little things that often matter, and we need to be able to see these complex risk relationships and things that can cascade down from the bowels of IT and operations and systems to become significant risks to the organization and its objectives.
Yes, completely agree. I would also like to ask you, what are the regulatory frameworks that companies need to be aware of to establish a good risk management and compliance practices?
Oh, certainly. Well, there's a lot out there. I mean, obviously, there's internal control frameworks like the COSO internal control framework, and with that they have the risk management framework. That's COSO. I mean, the Institute of Internal Auditors has the 3 lines model that helps us provide perspective there. I like the OSEC GRC capability model for structuring overall governance, risk, and compliance program. ISO's got a variety of standards that you need to be aware of. They've got ISO 31000, which is the risk management standard. They've got ISO 27000, which is the information security standard. There's other ISO standards for bribery and corruption, for corporate compliance and ethics, and ESG, and so much more. There's a variety of them out there. But what's really important is to approach it like the human body. When you look at the human body, you've got a skeletal system, a muscular system, a circulatory system, a digestive system, a nervous system. Any one of these systems doesn't make a whole human body. It's all those systems that make the body itself. The same with GRC. If we're going to really approach and build a good GRC program, it means that we need to bring like a risk management framework in, we need to bring an internal control framework in, compliance and things, and bring all these together to form that GRC body within our organization. These different frameworks work together and can be integrated. And the other thing about frameworks is you need to customize them to fit your organization, your culture, and your specific needs as well. It's not a one-size-fits-all that can address the needs and complexity of risk management in GRC across industries of different organizations of different size and industries. We need to make sure we build and integrate these different frameworks to fit what we're trying to achieve in our particular organization.
Now moving on to a more regional perspective. How do you perceive the GRC market in Latin America, and have you had any previous experience with GRC projects in the region?
Certainly, I work around the world, and so I do a lot of work, of course, in North America. I'm doing a ton of work in Europe right now, but then there's a lot of inquiries, interactions that come from Asia as well as Latin America. I've been down to Costa Rica for GRC. I've been down to Brazil, to both Rio and Sao Paulo, and have visits down there for GRC conferences and engagements. But also I get questions from Latin America because I answer inquiry questions. People can email me their questions on GRC strategy, process, and technology, and I answer them via email or phone call. And I have interactions down to Latin America on a fairly regular basis. And one of the things that I find is that the Latin America approach to GRC tends to be somewhere in the middle between what I see in North America and what I see in Europe. Europe takes a very business perspective of risk in GRC, while in North America, too often, and I'm generalizing here, but too often risk is seen as a compliance exercise, as we were talking about a few questions ago. In Latin America, I see sort of a mixture of both, that there's this compliance checkbox approach to risk, but I also see a lot of inquiries and interactions that take a business perspective to risk. And that's why solutions like Mega get a lot of momentum down in Latin America is because in a lot of those RFPs, people want to be able to model business processes and understand risk in a business process context, in an enterprise architecture context. And so that's some of what I'm seeing from Latin America when it comes to GRC.
Michael, we are heading to the final part of this conversation. I would like to know if you could share your opinion regarding the relationship that exists between enterprise architecture and GRC practices. You know that our solution, HOPEX, combines in a single repository enterprise architecture, business process analysis, and GRC, because we believe that this approach is very efficient to implement GRC properly by defining the scope in terms of processes, application, organizational structure, etc. What are the main benefits you see with this approach?
Well, first, it provides a very business perspective of risk and compliance and controls. It provides it right to the context of a business process or a business service. Now, I've been arguing for over 15 years that organizations should include business process modeling and enterprise architecture requirements in their GRC RFPs. I've been myself independent as an analyst. My competitors are Gartner and Forrester for 15 years. But before that, I spent 7 years at Forrester Research and wrote the first 2 Forrester GRC waves. The last wave that I wrote at the end of 2007 actually called this out, that organizations need to be able to model business processes and understand GRC in a context of how the business operates and works. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations haven't picked up on that until recently. It's only been in the last 5 years I've started to see a steady growth of requirements in RFPs in Latin America, but also around the world that are looking to understand requirements that for enterprise architecture and business process analysis and business process modeling in a GRC context. This is all critical. I mean, if you think about it, from an internal control standpoint, like Sarbanes-Oxley here in the United States, I mean, being able to lay out my accounting processes, my payroll processes, my procurement processes, understand those visually and understand the risk and control points along the way, that's absolutely critical. You look at something like privacy, like the EU GDPR, the Global Data Protection Regulation. Whatever privacy regulation you're dealing with, the very foundation is data flow diagrams. How does personal data, whether it's from an employee or a customer or somebody else, how does that information enter the organization? How does it move about and transition in the organization? How is it being used in the organization? That's data modeling. Now, in the context of resiliency, you've got a wide array of operational resilience type regulations around the world. In the United Kingdom, in the EU, Basel, and the Bank for National Settlements, and others, there's a lot of focus on operational resilience. If I'm going to be a resilient organization, it mandates, it's necessary to define what are my business processes, what are my business services, how are those being delivered, what are my impact tolerances and range of what's acceptable risk within those. You know, operational resiliency, business resiliency absolutely mandates and requires some type of enterprise architecture and business process modeling capabilities to define those business services and processes and be able to manage risk and compliance in their context.
As a conclusion to our session, will you be so kind to share with us some recommendations or best practices for a company that would like to start today their GRC journey? Where should they start and what steps should they follow?
Certainly. The first one is to understand the current state. As I started our discussion today, every organization is doing GRC, whether they call it GRC or something else. ERM, IRM, maybe they don't even you don't have a name for it. But something's happening today. So what's your current state? It could be manual processes with document spreadsheets and emails. It might be a GRC solution that's not working for you or delivering value. It could be a combination of both. But what's your current state? And then what's your future state? In 2 years from now, what do you want GRC to look like in your organization? If you had to design it and architect it, how does GRC work and operate in your organization? So you have your current state and your future state, and then you plan out your journey to get there. Then the next piece is to understand who should be on the team. Who's leading the strategy, but also who's on the team, from internal audit, enterprise and operational risk, to IT security, to corporate compliance and ethics, ESG, other departments and functions, who are all part of the strategy. Who are the core players? Who are the other players that might not be core players, but still need to be involved as well? How do we get them to work together on this strategy? The third thing to really understand, and it's critically important, is you want to start with the right technology. If you're climbing a mountain, for example, and you only have enough equipment to get halfway up the mountain, and you've got to climb all the way back down, get more equipment, start all over again, that's a failed expedition. You want to make sure that you start with the equipment you need, in this case, the GRC technology. So what your future state is that you're trying to aim for, you want to make sure that the technology foundation you're building upon can deliver on that future state. And then you need to be able to break things up into stages that are achievable in your organization and be ready for change, because the world's dynamic. There's geopolitical risks, there's mergers and acquisitions, there's new regulations and requirements and things that come aboard. We need to be able to adjust our program as we start to build it and execute on it as well.
That is really interesting, Michael. I think we have covered all the topics we have planned for today's session. Thank you very much for sharing your experience and knowledge about GRC with us. This session has been really insightful, and I am sure that our audience is very motivated to read more about you and your work. Until next time.
Thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure to interact with Mega and your audience today on the GRC needs in Latin America, as well as the global perspective as well.
Muchas gracias a todos por habernos acompañado hasta el final de esta sesión. Ustedes pueden seguir a Michael Rasmussen en LinkedIn y a Mega en YouTube y en LinkedIn. Si tienen cualquier duda sobre cómo pueden implementar GRC en sus organizaciones, nuestro equipo con gusto podrá ayudarlo para hacerlo de la mejor manera. Hasta la próxima. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, antes de que se desconecten, como les comentaba al principio, vamos a tener una sesión de Q&A con Michael Rasmussen en caso de que tengan alguna pregunta. Entonces, pero antes de esto, me gustaría poder compartir otra encuesta con ustedes que la deben de estar viendo en su pantalla. Y si me pudieran ayudar contestándola, por favor, se los agradecería mucho. Y posteriormente pasaremos a la sesión de preguntas y respuestas. Ok, muchas gracias por sus respuestas. Ahora tendremos una sesión de preguntas con Michael Rasmussen. Tenemos a Michael Rasmussen en la línea. Cómo va a funcionar es, yo voy a leer la pregunta en español y después se la voy a hacer en inglés a Michael Rasmussen para que todos puedan saber cuál es la pregunta. So, hi Michael, thank you for being with us today. Great session about GRC. How are you?
I'm doing well, and yourself?
I am doing fine, thank you. Doing really good. Thank you very much. So, Michael, we're about to begin with the Q&A session. Is that okay with you?
That's great.
Okay, perfect. So this is the way that it's going to work. I am going to read the question in Spanish, and then I will be reading the question in English so you can answer to us. this session is going to be shared with everyone afterwards. So whatever you say in English, I will be translating afterwards in the follow-up email. Okay. So we only have a couple of questions, so this should be quick. So this is the first question. What do you think about Gartner's approach to IRM as an evolution of GRC? Is it a concept that extends GRC or limits it?
I personally just see IRM as a rebranding of GRC. I mean, Gartner came out with IRM several years back, and they've dropped the IRM Magic Quadrant in much of their IRM research now. And so it's sort of defunct by already. But, you know, Gartner came out and said, you know, GRC technologies failed. We now have IRM technology. But it was their first Magic Quadrant in this space was the exact same players, exact same technology, exact same products. Nothing changed. All that changed was the acronym. It was just all smoke and mirrors from Gartner, from my perspective. But you know, there's some firms that use IRM. I actually did a debate against John Wheeler in a webinar last May on GRC versus IRM, and all the polls, GRC won by a landslide. I mean, there's only a minority, very small minority, that chose IRM over GRC in that webinar. But the reality is a lot of people, when they use the term IRM, they're talking exactly what I talk about GRC. GRC just has a better definition, and it has a better model behind it with the GRC capability model from OSEC. And there's a full publicly vetted standard behind GRC and so much more there that people can sink their teeth into, not some proprietary smoke and mirrors that Gartner invented, but didn't deliver on in more detail and make available. And so, I mean, so the reality is a lot of times when people talk IRM, it's exactly what I'm talking GRC. They're just using a different acronym.
Okay. Thank you very much for this answer. I forgot to read the question in Spanish, so una disculpa a todos. Olvidé leer la pregunta en español. La pregunta era, en un minuto aquí la tengo. ¿Qué opina acerca del planteamiento de IRM de Gartner como una evolución de GRC? ¿Es un concepto que amplía GRC o lo limita? Esa fue la pregunta que acaba de responder Michael Rasmussen. La respuesta en español se las estaré compartiendo en el mail de follow-up que les estaré enviando la próxima semana. Okay, so next question, Michael. Just give me a second, please. Here it is. What are your recommendations to encourage? Well, just let me read the question in Spanish first. ¿Cuáles son sus recomendaciones para lograr una mayor participación de los colaboradores de la organización al momento de tener que evaluar riesgos, declarar incidentes, complementar información del riesgo? Okay, Michael, so this is the question in English. What are your recommendations to encourage and achieve a greater participation of the organization's collaborators when having to assess risks, declare incidents, complement risk information?
I mean, the key there is engagement. I mean, risk isn't really done in the back office functions. Typically, we call second and third line functions of risk management. Risk is really managed and taken by the front office, operational management, frontline employees, executive management. And so when we deploy technology for risk management, it's absolutely essential that we provide intuitive, engaging user experiences where the front office, operational management, executive management, frontline employees, that they can interact and understand risk in their context, in their jobs. That's absolutely critical to be able to engage all levels of the organization on a risk management and educate them on what's acceptable and unacceptable risk.
Okay, understood. Perfect. Thank you very much. We have another question here. Ok, la siguiente pregunta es sobre cómo convencer a las organizaciones de gobierno, como institutos de investigaciones, educativos y otros, a adoptar el GRC para cumplir sus metas y objetivos. So Michael, this question is related to the government sector. Someone's asking specifically how to convince government organizations such as research and educational institutes and others to adopt GRC to meet their goals and objectives.
I'm sorry, can you say that once more?
Yeah, how can we convince government organizations such as organizations for research, educational institutes, and others to adopt the GRC to meet their goals and objectives?
I mean, I think
it works in the
part of that.
government sector.
Okay. I mean,
Okay.
part of that is defining a clear use case and business case for software that applies across industries. But right now, everybody's doing something for GRC, governance, risk management, compliance, or they call it GRC or something else. A lot of times it's manual processes that have a huge cost to them. And so it's really defining what our current is and what is it costing us in resources as well as mishaps and everything else, managing it this way today. And then if we move towards some change in strategy, process, or particularly technology like Mega, you know, what's the delta on that business case? How does this change make me more efficient and time saved, money saved, more effective in risk reduction and exposure, less things slipping through cracks, greater risk assessments being completed and done, and as well as agile, keeping up with the dynamic and changing business, risk, and regulatory environment. Of course, I use the term business, recognize we're talking about from a government agency, so that, but I think you understand.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. We have a couple of other questions. Tenemos otro par de preguntas y la primera de estas es, ¿cuál es la diferencia entre ERM y IRM? So Michael, I think this question is going to be a quick one. Someone is asking, what is the difference between ERM and IRM?
Well, to me, ERM is the stronger term. Again, as I already mentioned, I'm not a big fan of IRM. To me, it's just sort of relabeling things. To me, ERM is the R in GRC. It's an enterprise view of risk, and that includes both your strategic risks, such as, you know, where is the company headed, its direction and its objectives, as well as operational risks, as well as its financial and treasury risks like credit, market, liquidity, hedging and derivatives, and so forth. And so ERM is very broad in scope. It's broader than operational risk management because that's just one part of ERM, because ERM contains the strategic risk as well as, you know, the finance and treasury risks of the organization in addition to operational risk. IRM, when you unpack the evolving definition Gartner had, and again, they've sort of abandoned that whole line of research and publications. So there's not much going into it anymore. In that context, you know, IRM is very much more focused on the range of operational risks.
Okay. Okay, perfect. So the other question is, la próxima pregunta es, ¿cómo enfocar los riesgos de TI hacia el cumplimiento de los objetivos de la organización? Michael, so the next question is, how can we focus IT risks towards meeting the organization's objectives?
Well, I mean, that's by really helping and collaborating with the risk owners and takers out there in the line of business. And so the people that are taking and managing risk in the organization, what are their objectives? I mean, if we talk about the GRC definition in the GRC capability model, governance, risk, and compliance, GRC is a capability to reliably achieve objectives. That's the governance function, while addressing uncertainty, that's risk management, and active integrity, that's compliance. If we use the ISO 31000 definition of risk, risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. And so we need to clearly understand what those objectives are. They can be entity level objectives like performance or ethical or whatever objectives for the entire organization. They can be division level objectives, department, process, project level objectives, or even asset level objectives like EU citizen information that's governed by GDPR. You know, the information is an asset. What are the objectives and proper use of that asset? And so we clearly define our objectives at whatever level, and then map and understand our risks in the context of those objectives.
Okay, understood, Michael. Thank you. Thank you so much. So we have one last question. Tenemos una última pregunta y es ¿cómo se relacionan los planes de continuidad de negocio con la gestión del GRC? So Michael, this is the last question. How business continuity plans are related to GRC management?
Well, I've been talking for, 15 years that I don't understand why business continuity and disaster recovery are buried in one part of the organization and risk management in GRC is being done in a different part of the organization. The two belong together. And we're seeing a huge change in this, in that we're seeing a focus on bringing together risk and resiliency management. Some of this is being driven by regulations. So in the UK, you've got the Bank of England, PRA, FCA, Operational Resilience Regulation. In the EU, you've got DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act. You've got guidance from the Bank for National Settlements. In the US, you've got the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, guidance on operational resilience. And they all pretty much, talk about resiliency being an effective program for risk management, that it comes out of risk management. And so I see continuity shifting right now to become much more of a focus on resilience and bringing resilience under risk management.
Okay, understood. Thank you so much, Michael, for your answers. So we would conclude the session with this last question. So thank you very much, Michael, for your time and for being here with us, sharing your insights and expertise about GRC and GRC in Latin America. So thank you and hope you have a great day.
You too.
Thank you. Muchas gracias a todos. Esta fue la última pregunta de la sesión. Entonces, posteriormente les estaremos compartiendo esta sesión, ya que va a estar en nuestro canal de YouTube. Los invitamos a seguirnos en nuestro canal de YouTube. Ya lo puse en la sección de preguntas. A todos los registrados les va a llegar un mail de seguimiento con el link al video y vamos a poner en español las respuestas de Michael Rasmussen a estas últimas preguntas. Muchísimas gracias por habernos acompañado y espero que esta sesión haya sido de su completo agrado. Nos vemos la próxima. Hasta luego.